Today I'm going to be reading the story about the Wesleys. No song to be sung today. Charles Wesley, the poet of Methodism, was the 18th of 19 children born to the distinguished Anglican minister Reverend Samuel Wesley and his wife Susanna. Born at Epworth, Lincolnshire, England, Charles, with his brother John, who was 3 years older, were destined to have a profound effect upon the world in which we live. Both Charles and John were educated at Oxford. John was ordained a priest in the Church of England in 1728. In 1729, he returned to Oxford as a tutor, while Charles was at Oxford studying for his M.A. degree. At Oxford, the brothers with George Whitefield formed the Oxford Holy Club to counter prevailing attitudes. Its members were expected to follow a disciplined approach to Bible study, worship, communion, and visitation to the sick and imprisoned. Because of their methodical practice of religious concepts, the members of the Holy Club were soon referred to as Methodists by fellow students. Charles obtained his M.A. from Oxford in 1732, and in 1735 was ordained a deacon and an elder of the Church of England. Later in 1735, 13 members of the Holy Club, including John and Charles, set sail for Savannah, Georgia, where they planned to work as missionaries. Aboard a ship, they met a group of Moravians, and John Wesley became so interested in their hymn singing, he began to study German, making translations of their German hymns for his group of Methodists. Charles returned to England in 1736, and John followed 2 years later. Back in England, both Charles and John became friends of the Moravians' leader, Count von Zinzendorf, and in 1738 each had dynamic personal... Nice, let me cut the word off here. In 1736 or 1738, each had dynamic personal conversion experiences, and full of evangelical zeal, they set about to proclaim the message of Jesus to England, Ireland, and Wales. John was the organizing genius, preacher, and driving force, while Charles gave the movement the wings of music and developed its practical theology in his hymns. At a time when the Calvinistic belief in salvation of only an elect was widely held, the hymns of Charles and John Wesley loudly proclaimed the unlimited atonement of Jesus. It is said that the word all must have had a special place in Charles Wesley's vocabulary, for it appears so frequently in his hymns. In March of 1739, evangelist George Whitefield persuaded John Wesley to carry on his ministry to the coal miners of Bristol, England. While he returned to the colonies, John had never before conducted open-air services and wrote, "I could scarce reconcile myself to his strange way of preaching in the fields, having been all my life so tenacious of every point relating to decency and order that I should have thought the saving of souls almost a sin, if it had not been done in a church." Thus began, on April 2nd, 1739, the first of thousands of Wesley's revival meetings to be held in the fields before the multitudes who thronged to hear him. In his journal for May 9th, 1739, John wrote that he purchased a piece of ground near St. James Churchyard in the Horse Fair, on which to build a room large enough to contain the societies of Nicholas Street and Baldwin Street. And on May 12th, the first stone was laid. And there's the second Methodist meeting house established. The Foundry in London soon became the Methodist main headquarters. I might have missed another picture here. Here, the new room in the Horse Fair, Bristol, England. The first Methodist meeting house established in 1739. This building, the first Methodist meeting house, still stands today in Bristol, England, and although its official name is now Wesley's Chapel, Broadmead, it is still known as the New Room in the Horse Fair. The building was licensed for public worship on October 17th, 1748. The first to take advantage of the Totalitarian Act, or that is the Toleration Act, in 1689. Charles Wesley was furious, saying, "I protest against this needless, useless, senseless license. We are not dissenters. We are active members of the Church of England." Charles settled in Bristol in 1749 and married Sarah Gwynn. In 1771, they moved to London. Shortly after the property in Bristol was purchased, the need for a London headquarters also became evident, and later, in 1739, John leased a dilapidated cannon foundry that had not been used since an explosion in 1716, but all but demolished it. Out of this vast heap of ruins, he made a chapel, which could accommodate 1,500 people, a smaller meeting room for groups up to 300, and a book room. John also established on these premises services similar to those in Bristol, a free dispensary, a free school for 60 pupils, an almshouse for widows, and private apartments for visiting preachers. In 1777, it was decided to erect a new Wesley chapel on a site near the foundry. On November 1st, 1778, the new chapel, built to John Wesley's design, was opened by him and stands today as the Mother Church of World Methodism. Here's a picture of John Wesley's chapel in London. The Mother Church of World Methodism, built to John Wesley's design in 1778, and remains to this day a most important Methodist center. Although both John and Charles traveled extensively preaching, John set the record, over 200,000 miles on horseback, preaching more than 40,000 sermons during his 63-year ministry. Throughout their lives, Charles and John worked closely together. Their only real difference of opinion came as the movement grew too large for them to recruit enough Anglican Church of England ordained ministers, and it was then that Charles took exception to John's practice of allowing other preachers to give communion, to John's ordaining of ministers, and to permitting Methodist services at the same time as local Anglican church services. During his life, Charles wrote some 6,500 hymns, giving wings to the Methodist movement. John, the brilliant organizer, was also a good musician and superb music editor. The hymnals they published had worldwide effect, for at a time when many churches were discussing whether or not to permit singing, and Calvinists said only the elect were saved, Charles wrote hymns declaring salvation for all. And John wrote, for example, in his preface to their hymnal, Sacred Melody, these instructions for hymn leaders. Learn these tunes before you learn any other. Sing them exactly as printed here. If you have learned to sing them otherwise, unlearn it. Sing all. See that you join with the congregation. Sing lustily and with good courage. Beware of singing as if you were dead or half asleep. Sing modestly. Do not brawl so as to be heard above or distinct from the congregation. Sing in time. Whatever time is sung, be sure and keep with it. Do not run before or stay behind, but attend close to the leading voices. Take care not to sing too slow. Above all, sing spiritually. Have an eye to God in every word you sing. Aim at pleasing Him more than yourself. To do this, attend strictly to these senses of what you sing, and see that your heart is not carried away by the sound, but offered to God. And thus, the methods of Methodists eventually reached out, influencing the world.